Stay tuned. Ahead I'll talk with Dr. Diane Ehrensaft about Gender Explained, a new understanding of identity in a gender-creative world. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Dr. Diane Ehrensaft is a developmental and clinical psychologist whose previous books include The Gender-Creative Child and Gender-Born, Gender-Made. She is the co-founder and director of mental health at the Child and Adolescent Gender Center at the University of California, San Francisco, where she's also an associate professor of pediatrics. She joins us to talk about Gender Explained, a new understanding of identity in a gender-creative world, which she co-authored with Dr. Michelle Jurkiewicz. Diane, welcome to Some Books Considered.
And I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
This is an area that you study and you work with kids and others. But tell us about why you and your co-author wanted to put this in book form.
We wanted to put it in book form, the book Gender Explained, because everybody is either confused, jumping up and down, trying to make sense, or trying to do something about gender as it has changed dramatically over the last decade, or we could say the last generation, certainly from the time I was born until now, which is 78 years ago. So we to really try to help people untangle the confusion from the work we've done, what we've learned, and what we learned from the kids and families we work with.
Now, this is a very complicated topic, and in this brief interview, we're only going to be able to scratch the surface of some things. So give us a brief overview of what people are going to find in the book.
What people are going to find in the book are, number one, why does this make us so anxious when we read about children, for example, using the pronoun they, or saying, I don't like the way people say, I have to do my gender. If I'm a boy who likes sparkles, I should definitely be able to do sparkles. Or if I'm a girl who likes to play football, just bring on the uniform. Or anything that stretches gender beyond two boxes. We've all, in the number one, we've all counted on gender as bedrock, and we've now seen it thrown up for grabs, particularly by the children. It makes us anxious. The second thing is to go beyond anxiety, to be able to have a conversation about it, to think about it, not to say you must think one way about it, but to look inside yourself and look out in the world to see if we can make sense of what we're calling a whole new zeitgeist of gender that has changed dramatically, that we're all scrambling to catch up on. And the third thing is to hear the voices of the children and the families who are involved in what we've called a gender evolution that's now starting to look like a gender revolution. And we thought this was a perfect time in history to do that, given how gender has been both celebrated and weaponized at the same time.
I want to ask you about the subtitle of your book, because you use the term gender creative. What do you mean by that?
That is a very, very good question, Dan. I made it up. It's a term that I made up many years ago around the fact that all of us, you and me and everybody, has a gender. And we have something called what we call our true gender or authentic gender self, not static. It can change. But it's what we claim as this is who we are around our gender. Then sometimes we have to cover it up and code it, either to protect ourselves or to live comfortably in the world. And that's sometimes called our false gender self. It's our conforming gender self. And then we don't leave it there. We have a way we try to paint our own canvas with all that in place. And that is our creativity. And when it comes to gender, it's our gender creativity. So I always think it's the process of painting your gender canvas is your gender creativity. And I think we're living in a very gender creative world right now, which is what makes people anxious.
One of the things I found interesting, and, it's right there, you pointed out, but sometimes we don't think about it, is What's considered to be identified with one gender or another is fluid over time. And as you point out that men, like during the founding of the United States, were wearing powdered wigs and lacy shirts and those sort of things, but that wasn't considered feminine. That was considered masculine. So the idea of femininity or masculinity or, how you identify as a gender really does change over time.
Absolutely changes over time. And that's actually called our gender expressions. How we do our gender has dramatically changed over time, including that pink used to be a boy's color, a variation on red, which was the fighting color for men, and pink for boys. And that completely reversed. So we now know blue blankets for boys, pink blankets for girls, or throw it all out and just get a green blanket and don't type it. So those things have changed dramatically. On the other hand, all of our gender is a combination. It's a weaving together of nature, nurture, and culture. So we have to consider all three, which makes it not simple. It was very simple when it was simply rules. This is how you do gender. But when we start weaving a tapestry, or what I call create a gender web with these three major threads, it's a bit more complex, but it has always been that way. We're just now having a lens to look at it that way.
There are a lot of different terms, and you start out with the book with a lot of definitions of different terms. And we probably don't have time to go through all of them, but could you go through a few of those and define them for us, that people might hear these words and not quite understand what they mean?
There are many terms that are new terms. Some of them are old terms. Many of them are confusing terms. So going back to what I said before, the difference between gender identity and gender expressions. Gender identity is who I know myself to be as either male, female, combination of both, or some other iteration or unique sense of oneself, who I am when I think about my gender. That's your gender identity. Your gender expressions is how I present my gender to the world, what kind of clothes I wear, how I walk, how I kind of style my hair, do I wear makeup or do I not wear makeup, et cetera, et cetera. And those two common, gender identity, gender expressions, two different definitions, come in so many different combinations and permutations. We could say they're infinite. Then we also, something very familiar term, our sexual identity, who we're attracted to, who we think about when we think about our own attractions and romance. And we often clump those together and think they're the same or come in the same package as gender identity or expressions, and it's separate. It's like three railroad tracks that cross. So those are three definitions. We hear them a lot. We can get confused by them.
Definitely so. And I think one of the things that is sometimes confusing, I'd like you to elaborate on a bit, is the difference between sex and gender.
And now we use sex in a different way. So we take the duality off. And the way we understand it in what we call the gender affirmative model is when you're born, you are designated a sex, and that's typically based on your external genitalia, what's between your legs, as some medical professional or someone who's witnessing the birth sees it and says, oh, you have a boy, oh, you have a girl. We know sometimes it's more complex than that sex doesn't just come boy or girl, and there's something called intersex, which can be any combinations of XX and XY chromosomes. So when we use sex designated at birth, it's somebody thought about you, you are this sex. It is not the same as gender. Gender is your internal sense of yourself. It comes from your mind and your brain. Chromosomes can have an effect, but it's what your mind, your brain, your feelings tell you about who you are and how you look in the mirror and see yourself as a gender. And it could be one of many genders, not just one of two. So we have sex is given to you at birth. Gender is who you claim you are.
I'm talking with Dr. Diane Ehrensaft about Gender Explained, a new understanding of identity in a gender-creative world. And our conversation continues in a moment. If you appreciate this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. And thank you. In an ideal world, I guess we could just say, let people be who they are and don't get hung up on it. It's just who they are. Because there are a lot of different expressions and a lot of different ways that the world will react to them. You talk about one person who says, I'm a male, I identify as male, but I like long hair, I like fingernails, and I like to wear, paint my fingernails and wear dresses. But I'm still a male, but because of that expression, society is going to look at them differently.
That is absolutely correct. And that's what we call, it's a different definition, developing gender literacy. For us all to learn, actually, it's not that way. Boys wear pants, girls wear dresses. So I was a little girl, for example, historically, had to wear a dress to school in Chicago in blizzards. I am now a woman who I never wear a dress. I always wear pants, but I am a woman, and I'm a woman who wears pants. And we can see that doesn't kind of shake people up as much as a man who wears a dress. And that I do think has to do with a certain level of sexism in our society about what men shouldn't do to be more feminine. And that's cracking open now. And so certainly where I live in the Bay Area in California, you walk around and you can see every type of gender expression and not be able to quite tell what the person's gender identity is from that, because we've really opened the gates and broken down those boxes to have more gender creativity and more opportunity to do what people have always been doing historically, but they often hid it behind in certain bars or in their bedrooms because it wasn't okay. And we're now giving more permission for it to be okay. And there are people who get very nervous about that.
One of the statistics you mention in the book is between 2017 and 2020 that the number of kids who identified as transgender doubled. Why is that?
I actually think I would change that statement to the number of kids who let us know that they were not the gender you think they are or are thinking about doing their gender differently has expanded dramatically because we've opened up the gates to, number one, ask oneself those questions, discover oneself, and find out there's more than two options. So it looks like there's a phenomenal explosion. Some people call it a fad or a craze. And I think it's simply a historical shift that has allowed people to come out from under the rocks. And Erik Erikson, a long time ago, basically said that adolescence is a time of identity exploration. But when I went to school, we didn't learn, well, you explore your gender there. That was bedrock. And now we've just thrown it in the hopper. That's something you can look into yourself to find out who you are as well. So we see more people doing it.
Well, it sounds like, and I think you refer to this in your book, that we're just in a time of extreme change. And because of that, we look at things differently. And I think that some people that I've talked with say, I reject the stereotypes that go with different gender roles. So that's why I don't want to be called he or she, is because it's too constricting. And I'm more than that. And that's part of the reason they're looking at their gender and their identities.
And there are some people, then, just to build on that, who are saying, why do we even have gender as a category at all? Let's just throw it out. And I will say, good question. But I did an anthropological search. I could not find a culture that doesn't organize some way around gender, not the same way. So I think gender is here to stay. So it's a question of how we organize it in constrictive or expansive ways.
So again, there's so much to talk about here. We're not going to be able to cover it all, but I'm curious about the section of your book that has to do with parents and family and what advice you might have for them.
We talk about a gender journey for children as they explore their gender, and we forget to talk about the gender journey for the parents. Everybody has a gender, so when a parent has a child who's exploring their gender, it also confronts their own gender and their own beliefs and thoughts and actions around gender. So my message is, of course, it may be a shakeup, and you may feel off kilter. Give it time. And I am a believer in cognitive dissonance, that we have, on the one hand, we love our children very much. Majority of people certainly do. And on the other hand, we're sometimes taken aback or upset when we find out who we thought they were isn't who they're saying they are around their gender. So, like anything else, let love guide you and listen. Listen to your children, and if you need to work out your own feelings, if your children are being very gender creative, then find a firewall and a place for support to work through all your feelings. Don't push them under the rug. But remember, raising children is around helping them find their dreams, not imposing your dreams on them. It's the hardest part of parenting for all of us, no matter what it's about. It's specifically important around gender. And the reason is children do better when their parents support them and protect them around their evolving gender identities. They don't do as well when their own parents reject, question, or deny them.
Again, there's so much more we don't have time to talk about. What would you say are some of the key insights that you hope readers are going to take from the book?
Key insights for Michelle and I in writing this book together are, number one, we live in a new zeitgeist of gender where gender creativity is here to stay. Number two, as I said at the beginning, it makes people anxious in the same way that when people heard that the world was round, not flat, they said, no way, can't be. When the printing press came out, people said, the whole world's going to go to hell in a handbasket if we don't have handwritten manuscripts. We see it right now with AI. Is this going to be the best of worlds or the fall of civilization? In these moments, we're all uprooted, feel unbalanced. It's like moving from walking on bedrock to moving boulders. So I would say we, as a society, as a community, should commit ourselves to coming forward, thinking about this, looking inside yourself at your own values, what makes you nervous, and what's going to be for the good of society. In my book, the last thing I say I've learned from the children is a human right, that every human being has the right to live in the gender that feels most authentic to them, filled with acceptance and absent aspersion.
To learn more, the book is Gender Explained, A New Understanding of Identity in a Gender Creative World by Dr. Diane Ehrensaft and Dr. Michelle Jurkiewicz. Diane, thank you for talking with me today.
And thank you so much, and for all your questions, which definitely made me think.
If you'd like to purchase Gender Explained, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you appreciate this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you'll know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more interviews you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.